The Young and the Restless spoilers in the shimmering heart of the French Riviera, where the blue coast sparkled like the secrets buried beneath its waves. A name once feared and revered was reduced to a hollow echo. The mystique surrounding Aristotle Dumas, the man Cain Ashby had pretended to be, was officially shattered. The illusion of a suave billionaire titan ruling from the shadows with whispers of power and privilege was exposed for what it truly was, a fabrication. Cain was not Dumas. He was not an empire builder, not a global disruptor, not even a legitimate magnate. He was a fraud, a glorified assistant who had stepped into a power vacuum and played his role with a desperate mix of ambition, fear, and self-preservation. The name Cain Ashby had never commanded boardrooms or dominated headlines, because he had never built anything. He had inherited the scraps of another man's legend and twisted them into a stage upon which he could perform. But performances end, and truth has a way of ripping through veils when the stakes are at their highest. Adam and Chelsea, working in quiet synchronicity, had unearthed the final nail in Cain's coffin, a document so damning it didn't just disprove his wealth, it obliterated his very identity as Dumas. In that document, written in outdated legal French, buried in an old bank safe once owned by the real Aristotle Dumas, the truth screamed from the yellowing paper. The real Dumas had died years ago, under suspicious circumstances never fully explained. Cain had assumed his identity in the confusion, leveraging his insider knowledge and mastery of languages to pass undetected. But that was only part of the truth. The more explosive revelation, the one Adam and Chelsea barely believed even as they held it in their hands, was that Cain had not done it alone. Behind the curtain, pulling strings with venomous precision, was a man Genoa City had presumed long dead, Colin Atkinson. Colin's survival was a betrayal of history itself. For years, whispers of his death had circled the globe, rumors of a tragic end in South America, of debts unpaid and enemies triumphant. But Colin had done what he always did, disappear before the final blow could land. He had gone underground, reshaping his identity, biding his time, and feeding Cain with the tools and strategies to infiltrate a world that would have otherwise crushed him. It was not Cain's idea to become Dumas. It was Colin's masterstroke. Revenge was never far from Colin's mind, and Genoa City was full of ghosts he longed to resurrect or destroy. He blamed Victor for turning Jill against him. He blamed Billy for the failures of the Chancellor legacy. And above all, he blamed Jill for loving too little, too late, when all he had ever wanted was her loyalty. And now Jill, unaware of the storm brewing in Nice, had accepted an invitation she thought was about business. A chance to reclaim old glory, to secure the Chancellor name in international markets. But that invitation was a trap, a velvet one, laced with memory, perfume, and deceit. It bore Cain's name, but it dripped with Colin's intent. When Jill arrived, the air itself turned cold. Colin emerged not as a ghost, but as a man hardened by exile. His hair was grayer, his posture stiffer, but his eyes had not lost their fire. Jill's reaction was not theatrical, it was visceral. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. She whispered his name with a disbelief that split her in two. Part of her wanted to run to him, slap him, scream at him for making her mourn him. But another part of her wanted to embrace him, just to prove he was real. Colin, with all his poison and charisma, offered no apology. He offered vengeance. He told her of the power they could reclaim together, of how Victor had grown weak, of how Chancellor could rise under their rule, not Cain's, not Billy's, but theirs. And Jill, so often the voice of reason in a world gone mad, was suddenly silent. She had always craved power as much as love, and now both stood before her in the same body. But the heart of the storm was Billy. Upon hearing of Colin's resurrection, Billy's fury was incandescent. He had buried his mother's grief, delivered eulogies, and vowed to outlive the shadow Colin had left behind. Now, all that pain was meaningless. Billy felt the betrayal not just as a son, but as a man trying to redefine himself after a life of chaos. Seeing Colin alive shattered something in him. He had believed that certain battles were over, certain ghosts put to rest. But Colin's presence reopened every wound? The gambling, the manipulation, the threats to Delia's memory, the way he used Jill as both sword and shield. Billy confronted him in Nice, and the meeting was explosive. Colin, smug and unrepentant, offered Billy a seat at the new table. He said the old world was dying, and that Billy could either join the architects of the new order or be trampled under its foundation. Billy spat in his face. Meanwhile, Adam and Chelsea, having played their hand, now found themselves at a crossroads. The exposure of Kane and the unveiling of Colin were victories, but dangerous ones. Adam knew that men like Colin didn't emerge without a plan. And Chelsea, having once been used by powerful men with darker agendas, feared that Kane's collapse would only be the beginning. They debated what to do with the proof they held. If they released it publicly, they could topple the illusion of the Dumas estate, humiliate Jill, destabilize Chancellor, and ignite another war in Genoa City. But if they held on to it, they could manipulate the chessboard from behind the scenes. Chelsea was tempted by the latter. Adam, torn between his father's legacy and his own desire for justice, was less certain. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, Genoa City felt further away than ever. In its place was a battlefield forming in the salons of Nice, one lined not with soldiers but with secrets. Colin moved like a man possessed, every interaction a calculation, every smile a weapon. He began whispering into the ears of investors, tempting them with promises of rebirth under the Dumas-Chancellor hybrid. He told them that Victor was aging out, that Lily lacked killer instinct, that Billy was emotionally unstable. And as always, there were some who listened. There always were. But the one person Colin could not manipulate was Devon. When Devon learned that Kane's empire was a lie, and that Colin had orchestrated it, his blood boiled. He had once tried to give Kane the benefit of the doubt. He had even defended him. But this betrayal ran too deep. It wasn't just about money or power, it was about legacy. About honesty. About the names that Devon's father and grandmother had tried to elevate with dignity. Devon flew to France with a singular mission: stop Colin. Not just for Chancellor, but for Neil. For Catherine. For every lie that threatened to swallow truth. The final question loomed like a specter in the ballroom. What would Jill choose? Love or legacy? Forgiveness or fire? Her silence was answer enough. And Colin smiled, because he knew that as long as Jill hesitated, he still had power. Adam had always trusted his instincts. He'd survived by them, thrived by them, and manipulated entire empires with little more than a hunch and a smirk. But nothing in his long history of deception, revenge, and betrayal had prepared him for what he saw that night. Two shadows sitting close in a dimly lit room inside the Dumas estate in Nice. Kane, disheveled and tense, leaned forward over a folder of documents, and opposite him, across the mahogany table, sat a man who should not have existed, Colin Atkinson. But there he was. Alive. Unaged. Unapologetic. And, most shockingly, calm. Too calm. The way he spoke to Kane was not like a man recently returned from the dead. He wasn't grateful. He wasn't cautious. He was in command. Adam's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a man re-entering the chessboard, this was a king reclaiming his throne. And suddenly, the whispers made sense. The opulence of the Dumas name. The unnatural timing of Kane's rise. The deep financial channels and offshore accounts that had eluded even Victor's best investigators. Because this wasn't just Kane's scheme. This wasn't just Kane pretending to be Dumas. This was Dumas. Or someone so deeply entwined with that identity that the lines between truth and fabrication had long since blurred. And if that man in the chair really was Colin, then the implications were catastrophic. But Adam didn't move. He couldn't. His eyes scanned every detail, Colin's posture, the ring on his right hand, the slight limp he remembered from years ago. It all fit. But something didn't. Something was off. Colin had always been erratic, explosive, the kind of man who created chaos like breathing. But this version of him was colder, more precise. Calculated in the way Dumas was rumored to be. Could it really be the same man? Theories collided in Adam's mind like clashing gears. Was Colin actually Dumas all along, orchestrating his own death years ago to disappear and rebuild under a new name? Or was the man across from Cain a brother, someone the world never knew existed? A twin? A clone? It sounded insane, but this was Genoa City, and Adam knew better than anyone that in a world ruled by secrets, the line between reality and fabrication was paper-thin. If Colin had always been Dumas, then everything made a chilling kind of sense. His vendetta against the Newmans rooted in decades-old humiliation at Victor's hands, or perhaps in something even deeper, something personal, something buried. Maybe Victor and Colin had once been allies turned enemies. Maybe Victor had stolen something from him, his name, his company, or even Jill. The motive didn't matter as much as the execution. And from the looks of it, Colin, or the man claiming to be him, was planning his final act. But if he wasn't Colin, if he was a twin or even a body double, then the game shifted again. It meant someone had replaced Colin years ago, perhaps with his blessing, or perhaps not. It meant there was another layer to the deception, one that even Cain might not fully understand. Maybe Cain thought he was working with Colin, reviving his legacy, only to discover that the man pulling his strings had never been the man he believed in. Adam felt the walls closing in. He needed proof. He needed DNA. He needed surveillance. And most of all, he needed time. But time was the one currency Colin, or Dumas, was burning faster than anyone could keep up with. The moves were already in play. Jill had arrived. Billy was spiraling. Devon was on the warpath. And the Newmans were walking blindly into a trap built not by a ghost, but by a mastermind who had watched them for years, waiting for this exact moment to strike. Back at his suite, Adam pored over what little intel he had. Photos. Financial records. Travel logs. None of it made sense unless you accepted one singular truth: the man in that room was not just Colin. He was more. He was something darker, older, and far more dangerous. Perhaps he had used the Colin identity to infiltrate the Atkinson family. Perhaps he had taken that name to get close to Jill and exploit Chancellor's weaknesses. Perhaps the death of the real Colin had occurred long ago, and no one had noticed, because the imposter had played his role so convincingly. The question now wasn't just, who is Colin? It was, how far does this lie go? And more disturbingly, what if Victor knew? And chose to bury it? If you want to explore even deeper theories, here are some optional directions for your story to branch off. Fire possible twists you could use. Colin and Dumas were identical twins separated at birth, part of a dark adoption plot orchestrated by someone from Chancellor's past. Only one survived, or so we thought. Colin murdered the real Dumas decades ago, took over his empire, and faked his own death to cover his tracks. Jill was always a part of the plan. Victor once tried to expose Colin as Dumas years ago, but lost a secret power struggle, and has been hiding it ever since. Adam discovers that Jill knew all along, and has been protecting Colin/Dumas out of guilt, love.